Well, thank you very much. We greatly appreciate everyone for coming on. And, as we get going, we wanted to introduce our panel and talk really about our topic as a whole. And clearly, COVID has impacted so much of what we're doing today, but we recognize that automation may hold those promises on how to address some of the challenges as we emerge from the COVID period. And, we clearly see automated fleets delivering supplies. We have the concepts of automated shared mobility as being a way to easily transport passengers without thinking about how you engage drivers or even how you enable, again, just sort of better social distancing. But as we know, during this period, a lot of automated testing has been shutting down. But we understand also that they will start and they will restart. And when we say shut down on American roadways, that doesn't necessarily mean things have shut down behind the scenes. And we're really excited to have our panel here today. And you'll see us all on video right now as we're here, but we're going to hop on and off as we have folks sort of engage and talk a little bit about what's going on. But a few things that we are going to chat about today. And again, as you know, with these webinars, we love hearing from our experts and what's happening in the industry. And we have assembled a fantastic group of leaders really in automation and what's happening around the country. But we also want to hear from you. We have people here on our call and in the webinar who are just as engaged in this process, who have thoughts and interesting perspectives and even projects that are going on their side that can help us engage and think about this picture. Because at ICS America, really what we're about is how do we emerge from the post-COVID world and thinking about how we continue to drive a safer, greener, and smarter transportation system. And what does that mean and what does that look like? What are the policies attached to that? What is the structure that we need to do? What are the partnerships between the public and the private sector that enable that to happen? And so what is that path forward? And what we're hoping, and I recognize that there are many webinars that you can attend these days, and so thank you for joining in on this one, is how do we have a unique conversation about some of the very specific things that need to happen that would actually enable automation to continue to be part of our transportation mobility landscape. So with us today, we have a series of speakers, and I wanted to chat just a little bit about how this is going to work. What we're going to ask our speakers to do is they're going to give about a 5 to 7 minute sort of overview of where they are, where they've been with their organizations, what they're doing right now. And then we're going to take a break. And we're going to answer some of the questions that you guys might be asking even already. We've gotten some as you were registering, but then we're going to engage you. And so as Rachel mentioned, you see on your screens, everyone's gotten very used to how Zoom works now. In the Q&A section, I'm actually going to be asking some questions of you, the audience. And at the same time, I'm going to ask our panel to sort of consider them as well. And I may call out a few of those answers, and we'll all be able to see them on that Q&A chat line as we go through this. But I may ask a couple of you to raise your hand and talk just a little bit more about what you all were talking about. Again, the idea of being interactive in these webinars is so much what we hope to achieve, because we can pull together the collective thinking of this transportation industry to be able to sort of drive change. And that's our goal at ITS America. So I'd like to actually start by, as we engage, just to introduce briefly our panelists and then ask them to get going. So we are super, super fortunate to have private sector automation companies joining us today. Robert Brown, who's the Director of Government and Public Affairs with TuSimple, is joining us, as well as Eric Danko, who's the Director of Federal Affairs with Cruise Automation. And Eric, way back in the day, I worked with your founder on some things related to Cruise, so it's fun to see sort of where you've gone in the last few years. We're also very fortunate to have public sector agencies who've engaged in automation, and frankly, one of the leaders with that has been Jacksonville Transportation Authority. They were well positioned to take advantage of what was happening during the COVID experience, and Bernard Schmidt, who's the Vice President of that automation program, is going to talk a little bit about what they've done. And then lastly, we've asked Tim Woods, who's the founding partner of POCO Labs, and he's the general manager of the Autonomous Vehicle Alliance. This is a consortium of OEMs and how they pursue thinking about research and automation. Who's going to join us. What we're really talking about is what this means for automotive mobility, and especially in a time where investment in infrastructure and transportation might help jumpstart the economy. What's the place of automation in all of that? So to start, I'd actually like to turn it over to Robert, and Robert's going to give us a review of sort of what's happening, and we're going to go from there. So thank you, Robert.
Thanks, Amy. I think actually I'm going to try to spare you guys from some of my slides and show you a video that we prepared during the COVID crisis that TuSimple keeps up and running, hauling from our UPS facility outside of Phoenix. So if I could get someone to cue the video. Right, sorry. All right, thank you. That was it's a little buffery, but hopefully you got the idea. As TuSimple as a lot of tech companies, I'm working from home, and the majority of the company is working from home. But our testing that with real loads with UPS and the food bank and McLean Foods was deemed essential, and so we kept our program going during COVID, moving pro bono loads for the food bank in and around Arizona, out to Texas, and our daily operations for UPS and a few others as well. So TuSimple, we're latest on those heavy trucks since 2015. When I first got started with the company 2.5 years ago, the trucking space was pretty small. It was Embark and ourselves, and Uber was on their way out. But now trucking's cool. It's a very crowded field. Lots of good people in the space. I get the privilege to work with a lot of our competitors. We're competitive from a business perspective, but from a regulatory and a public acceptance, we have a good working relationship. So really looking forward to this discussion. Thank you, ITS, and happy to answer questions going forward.
Thanks, Robert. And, as we get going, we're going to turn it also to Eric. When I said 5 to 7 minutes, you took that very seriously, so thank you. But we're going to turn it over to Eric Danko, who is with Cruise, and he's going to chat a little bit about where they've been and where they're going. And then, folks, we wanted to get into a great conversation with you, as well as our other panelists and then the audience.
Yeah, that sounds great. And thank you, Amy and ITSA, and everyone else for joining. I promise I have a cool video too. I'm going to save it for the end, but we'll get there. Cruise, for those of you who may not be familiar with us, we're a self-driving car company based in San Francisco with a mission to build the world's most advanced AVs to safely connect people to the places, things, and experiences they care about. We're majority owned by General Motors. We also partner with Honda and are developing what's called L4 technology. So fully self-driving within a defined geo-fenced area. And we intend to operate that as both a car sharing service, so passengers as well as goods, a self-driving car service. Our vehicles are not only fully electric, but in California, as of Q4 of 2019, they're now powered exclusively by solar energy, so renewable energy, which is something that we're really, really proud of at Cruise. Prior to COVID, we had been testing our fleet 24/7 on the streets of San Francisco. which is, those of you who may know, is one of the most complex driving environments in the country. And that was very purposeful. On-road testing is the single most important tool we have for vehicle improvement. And when you do that testing in a complex driving environment, you can really see exponential growth in the technology's capabilities. At the beginning of March, consistent with state and local ordinances, we grounded our test fleet and pulled our cars off of the road, in addition to instituting a work from home policy for our employees. As a company, we really pride ourselves as being part of the community. And right out of the gate, we asked ourselves what we could do to help, even in a very small way. The first thing we did is we put together an employee giving campaign and raised about $500,000 for the city of San Francisco for local response efforts, in addition to those at the World Health Organization. And more recently, and relative to this conversation, we repurposed a portion of our self-driving fleet and began running autonomous contact-free food delivery in partnership with the SF Marin Food Bank and the SF New Deal, which is an organization that works with small businesses, in this case restaurants, to provide food to the most at-risk in the community. I got the stats this morning, the updated stats this morning. Since April, since the middle of April, we've now made over 20,000 self-driving contact-free deliveries with our partners at the SF Marin Food Bank and with the SF New Deal, which is both remarkable and spectacularly humbling, and just really gives a sense of the onus of the responsibility that's on these organizations to meet unprecedented demand that they're seeing, obviously, on the back of the crisis. The reason we're doing this work is really straightforward. We are part of the community, plain and simple, and we're in the community every single day. Prior to COVID, we were at merchant association meetings, neighborhood association meetings, we do workforce development. We're literally in the community every single day. It is not enough to win the tech race. We have to win the trust race too, and I know that's going to be a topic of conversation. So working with the food bank, working with SF New Deal, we really saw the demands on these partners in order to scale their services in response to COVID. And so we reached out, we offered our fleet, our self-driving fleet, to provide safe contact-free delivery, and are really just very humbled that we've been able to demonstrate the usefulness of this technology in a very small way. Amy, you asked me to talk about perspectives in terms of moving forward. What really strikes me is that what's interesting here is that we're seeing the first real organic use case of self-driving technology that no one could have imagined even a few months ago. And it's coming at a moment in time when the technology is very much still in development. Now, as a company, we're motivated by a fundamental belief that the transportation status quo is broken. It's too unsafe, it is too polluting, it is too inaccessible for too many people. And if any of us needed a reminder of that fact, just last week, or maybe the week before, NHTSA released its 2019 roadway fatality statistics. And again, last year, more than 36,000 people died on the road. That's drunk driving, that's distracted driving, that's drowsy driving. It's human error. And AV can play a role in that. We've accepted these statistics for far too long. Roadway safety is a public health emergency, and AVs can play a role in helping to improve the situation. Now, what we couldn't have imagined even a few months ago is that there would be an additional public health use case here, helping us navigate this new world of social distancing and contactless delivery. And there, AVs are playing a small role. I don't want to oversell that, but it's one that really highlights the potential of the technology and is enough, at least, to understand the potential for the technology and added impetus to continue developing the technology. So the challenge really becomes, how do we continue developing self-driving technology in this new environment to ensure that we're better prepared into the future? There are technological challenges and there are regulatory challenges. And I think it's incumbent on both the public sector and the private sector to move forward to enable the future development of this technology. Now, from a tech perspective, we're not standing still. While the majority of our vehicles have been pulled off the road, we've really leaned into simulation testing to continue developing technology during the COVID crisis. And this is the video that I promised. And so, Amy, I'll turn it to you in a second. our engineers have constructed a virtual 3D rendering of the world that allows our vehicles to continue to navigate a computer simulation of the complexities of San Francisco driving. And because the ADS is fundamentally a computer, the autonomous driving system is fundamentally a computer, it doesn't know that it's not on the road. And so every single day, our vehicles are going through the equivalent of 200,000 hours of computer sim, which is the equivalent of 22 years of straight driving experience. It does not replace the need for on-road testing in no way, shape, or form, but it's an important tool in the toolbox and one that we've really leaned into. Amy, this is probably a good time to play the video. So I'm gonna stop in 2 seconds. I really want to get into the Q&A portion of this. But again, 200,000 hours of sim training per day, 22 years equivalent of on-road experience every single day. I guess just to quickly wrap before I stop, AV goods delivery is playing a small role in the current pandemic, but it's one that's large enough to really understand its potential into the future. And that's really what's motivating us at this moment in time. We see this as a clarion call for both the public sector and the private sector to really step up to ensure we're better prepared into the future. And that's a real synergy of the public and private sector in both developing the technology and also enabling that path forward. So maybe I'll stop there.
Excellent. Thanks, Eric, for doing that. And if I can ask our other panelists to come on, this would be a fantastic time to do this. And, you know, I think that it's a great piece that you've done, and we'll bring everyone up on video and sort of have our colleagues help with that as well. Yeah, I'm going to start with the first question because I think one of the things that we're seeing with this moment, and you really talked about the technology, and a question that we got earlier as the audience was registering was, will R&D resources and expenditures be impacted by COVID? And I think you see some interesting byproducts of what's happening right now. Obviously, our OEMs are sort of continuing to think about what's happening in regards to sort of auto sales and the like, what this means for their divisions and the kinds of dollars that they spend. Obviously, Cruise, you're a part of that under the GM umbrella. We have other companies that are experiencing challenges and layoffs, Lyfts and Ubers of the world and the like. And so let me just put that question to both of you, Robert and Eric. As you're thinking about your companies and you're thinking about the continued investment, and Eric sort of framing out exactly what you're doing sort of in the sim world, and that simulation actually was really quite interesting to see sort of all the maneuvers that are being made. How do you look at R&D now moving forward? Does it change? Does it decrease? Does it slow you down? Or does it accelerate?
I would say we need to accelerate here. I think the as I was saying a second ago, this is really a clarion call for industry to step up and the public sector to step up, for us collectively to move forward and to do what we can to ensure that the technology is able to develop to a point where, if there is a future pandemic where we need to continue to exist in a world where driverless technology, contact-free delivery, social distancing is the norm or is experienced on a seasonal level, I mean, we have no idea what moves forward. I think there is enough clarity of purpose here that we need to continue developing the technology to ensure that we're prepared for that eventuality, whatever it may come. And so as a company, and I can obviously only speak on behalf of one company, we're continuing to make that investment and we're continuing to push forward. And SIM is really just one very good example of that.
How about you guys, Robert, as you guys sitting? I'm not asking you to reveal all of your company's secrets necessarily, but I think it's one of these interesting questions that people keep having when you're in this kind of world.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with Eric more. I mean, if anyone that went grocery shopping the first few weeks of the pandemic, you realize how tenuous our supply chain really is. And, having automated trucks, level 4 automated trucks, will help. And we understand even what we're doing now is great and we're helping community. It's still a teaspoon, in the ocean compared to, what truck drivers are doing out there today. But it definitely knows, what the technology can be and become. And luckily, we're very fortunate to TuSimple. Our investors have supported us through this and continued. And as you mentioned, there's quite a few layoffs in our sector. That is just a part of, R&D, startup, when money gets tight, those are some of our decisions. Again, we've been fortunate. We're actually still hiring. So if anyone is out there, unfortunately looking for a job, please visit us, and other companies that are still hiring. There's room to grow in this space. But yeah, it'll be difficult times. Venture capital will be tight for the next few months, and hopefully not just for that reason, but we bounce back as a country, and and the markets return.
Well, and I don't want to get into sort of the country pieces of it and the policy here, but we actually have a few questions coming in about the operations side of how people are looking at all of this. And we're going to turn to our public sector partners here in a minute, and so I'm going to get to you, but let me just go real quick. As you guys are going back onto the streets, and obviously, Robert, TuSimple has continued doing their truck deliveries right now across the country. As you know, you're in the southwest of the country doing your sort of runs right now. But are we continuing to have safety drivers in? How are you thinking about safety drivers plus the cleanliness of the vehicles, whether it's, you're carrying the cargo side and sort of the cargo delivery piece of it, but then also even then as you do contactless delivery or have your safety drivers in the vehicles, Eric, as you guys are going through the streets of San Francisco. But Robert, first.
Yes. Safety drivers in the vehicle, increased cleanliness, masks, temperature checks. We also did it on a volunteer basis, but our team was awesome. Everyone volunteered. So it was a real moment in our company, honestly. Everyone was obviously nervous, just like the whole country. And we just had an all hands meeting a few days ago. And it's been a real proud, kind of badge that our operations team has worn, from the test operation engineers, who we call our right seaters, with our drivers. It's been, like I said, we realize our place in the food chain with our 40 trucks. We're very proud of that, but we understand the lion's share of what's done out there by the larger fleets and owner operators. But it's all I can say is we're doing our part, and it's been a moment for all of us to reflect and be very proud of the work we're doing in our communities.
Eric, as you guys go back onto the streets, do you still have drivers, et cetera? Or your
yeah,
safety
we
attendants?
do. Yeah, it's a great question. I appreciate you raising it. And in large respects, can echo what Robert just described. Our vehicles do still have safety drivers behind the wheel at all times. And that's something that we deemed was important, of course, from a safe operations, roadway safety perspective. And again, it was done very similarly to what Robert described, purely on a volunteer basis. And we've taken, obviously, precautions in terms of cleanliness and everything that you would imagine to ensure the safe operations, not only of the vehicles, but also the safe operations from a human perspective as well. It really is a tremendously humbling experience to play a very small role in a much larger response effort. And so we have worked really hand in hand with our partners, in this case, the SF Marin Food Bank with SF New Deal, to understand the needs that they're under and to work in concert with them to ensure that they're able to scale effectively. And it's just been a really remarkable experience and has allowed us to interface with the community in a way that nobody thought we would have to do, not have to do, but have the opportunity to do. I mean, nobody saw really the breadth of this and the opportunity to interact and to really play a service, small as it may be, in terms of disaster response, has just really been a tremendously humbling experience on behalf of the company, and a very positive one.
Well, and this is actually a good transition to our other panelists and sort of the nature of the question. And then audience, be prepared, because I wanted to ask you a question as we get into this. But it's a question about use cases, like you were talking about earlier, Eric, and to Tim and to Bernard, and maybe I'll start with Bernard and then come to Tim, is, you know, as we migrate back into this active life and these use cases start getting defined in a way that we weren't thinking about, but with something that is a still emerging technology, is how do you see us changing travel patterns? And what are you seeing sort of from an autonomous vehicle alliance, Tim? And then Bernard, as we get into this, obviously, and I'm going to transition to eventually sort of what Jacksonville has done, but do the public agencies who are a core part of that mobility, do they embrace some of this? So Tim, how do you see those trends changing perhaps as we emerge into new travel patterns? And this is a question from one of our members, our audience members.
Yeah, so it's been fascinating over the last 6 weeks in particular, because all of the dialogues have been kind of laser focused around what's happening with the pandemic and how it's influencing the work that we're doing. So we're doing work around accessible and barrier free. As you know, your ITSA is a partner with us on this with AARP. And what's been fascinating is to listen to the different transit organizations, paratransit, and others talk about movement of people and how they're moving away from pooled into individual rides, which is not exactly what we wanted to see happen in metropolitan transportation authorities. But they're trying to deal with this whole idea of how do we keep passengers safe, how do we keep drivers safe? And when we start to look at new vehicle platforms around accessible and barrier free, there's absolutely things that are starting to influence us. One thing that actually hit me kind of sideways recently was and told me that camper rentals in this country are going through the roof. Right. People who are buying and or renting campers to go on vacation because it's their ability to control the environment, right? The mobility environment. And with my family on vacation. And that was an industry that was literally tanking. There's no other way to put it. Elkhart, Indiana was seeing some of its hardest days. And now there is this huge push for campers. Now, all of this is interrelated. And every piece of research that we're doing on fleet delivery, grocery delivery, accessible and barrier free, even pilots that we're looking at now, all have a cast of what's happening in the world right now. And it's quite frankly making people question and reevaluate their plans for moving forward and how they're looking at their overall mobility mix.
Right. Well, and Bernard, let me ask you this question. And before we go to your presentation, because I have a question for the audience that I want to turn to and I want to ask you guys, but do public agencies embrace, do we think, the concept of automation and mobility? And obviously I'm teeing that up for an agency that clearly is doing some of that, but writ large, what do you see right now?
Yeah, and thank you for the question, Amy, and thank you for having me. I think absolutely. I think for us, certainly we do. As you know, I think for us, we've been in this paradigm shift of trying to address what we call the first and last mile kind of gap in public transit. COVID has certainly thrown a curveball, as Tim just explained, with folks now wanting to kind of have a little bit more of a segregated approach, while public transit has been about this communal kind of transportation piece. But certainly for us, we see the work that we're doing with autonomous vehicles and autonomous shuttles being a part of that. And I think it's going to actually impact on both sides of the coin. I think you're going to have this kind of first and last mile kind of situation where you're going to have to, there are folks that just want their own individual transportation to and from a particular location. But be very clear, I think mass transit, public transit is going to come back, particularly in large cities that have density. Places like New York, Chicago, LA, there is no way that we can just bridge that gap and have everybody get back on the road with an individual vehicle. And so I think there will be a place for that where mass transit will come back, and will come back in a safe way. And when maybe it's well after that there's a vaccine. But in the meantime, this technology right now is fit for this purpose, and helping us address a multitude of issues, whether it is delivering food, delivering goods, and even transporting people. So I definitely see the benefit, even in the public sector.
Well, and we have several other questions coming from our audience we'll get into, but I wanted to ask one of the audience. And so as we go into this, here is your question, and it's going to pop up in the chat function here, and it should come through. Hopefully I have entered it in. There it is. So here's the question to our panelists, but I'm also asking it of our attendees. And if you can, actually respond in the Q&A, and then that way everyone can sort of see your comments and your questions, and I'll talk with you. But as we talk about automation as pointing the way to this, the policy piece of this is a big part. And I think, Bernard, you guys are probably going through it in regards to how you got your automation project on the ground as quickly as you did, or on the road. But what policy should be governing automation to help it advance? Do we have the right sort of structure right now within the US, or even at the federal level and otherwise, to be able to keep it moving forward? So in other words, are we doing right by now advancing these use cases that we're maybe seeing, whether it's contactless automated delivery or the like? And so let me ask that question of our panelists, especially as we have two policy people sitting on the phone. And let me start with Robert and ask that question. What policies enable this to continue to move forward? And actually, is it possible to even accelerate automation from a policy perspective?
Yes, I kind of see it as a twofold. Obviously, at a state and local level, we work in concert very closely. We operate in Arizona, New Mexico, and Texas. So working with the law enforcement community, the DOTs, I never like to surprise anyone. So we always reach out before there's, some big news, or let's say, 60 Minutes did a story a few weeks back on our space, and making sure kind of stuff. So, working within, the regulatory framework within the states is vitally important. And that's a relationship. Good old fashioned, government and public affairs is building trust, inviting them into behind the tent, having them see the technology, touch the technology, learn about our safety program. And then from the federal perspective, obviously especially for our business use case, interstate commerce is key, going across the country. And so, we are working in lockstep with our industry competitors, I could even say, working within US DOT and specifically FMCSA. We're hopefully in the preface, about ready to kick off the NPRM from FMCSA and taking a lot of those AB 3.0 guidances and starting that rulemaking process. So that, as we see, those key definitions of a driver being an automated driving system, an ADS system, as our number one priority as an industry for the heavy automated truck industry. I feel confident I can speak with my friends and competitors on that. So, because we see that as a key to unlock that, what we're calling kind of the lower 48. Those key definitions that were in guidance, but if we can have those in a rulemaking, that'd be a huge win and give certainty to the industry. I always like to point this out. Prior to AB 3.0, again, there was 2 companies, and that was about it. We were relatively 2 small startups. And since AB 3.0, where they included trucks and provided a pathway, you've had pretty much every major OEM, a dozen startups. The amount of money being invested in the space is astronomical. So it just shows you the power of regulations and leadership. So I'd like to thank the DOT and especially a big shout out to FMCSA as well.
Interesting. And, as we're sitting and talking, a couple of the comments that are coming in on the chat, for instance, would public acceptance, for instance, be higher if automated trucks were initially allowed to operate just between midnight and 5 a.m., sort of, against when traffic's very low, and would there be
graveyard
automated
shift?
acceptance?
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly, and hit the graveyard shift, which is, of course, what truckers today tend to do anyway, simply to avoid traffic in a regard. But I'd like to mention one, and if you could raise your hand. You see there's the raise your hand function on this, but you talked about data sharing policies, and here's the comment. The data sharing policies help garner public acceptance, as we were talking about what public policies allow for also broader public acceptance. Being able to see the data and use that as backup to continue with the automation goes a long way. Could you raise your hand, Jeff? You were the one who mentioned this, and would you be willing to just share a little bit more of your thoughts on that? This is our audience member. If we have him, have we unmuted Jeff so that you can talk? Yes, go ahead, Jeff. Thanks.
All right, thanks.
Perfect.
Yeah, I think I've had several discussions around this, and I think I'm providing assistance in Columbus, and we've been able to gather a lot of data as we've been running our vehicles, and we're able to share that with the public, and they, not only seeing like how much automation is occurring or how far you've traveled, maybe how many passengers or certainly trips you may take with a truck, but I also see it as a way of, there's still the potential for more incidents in the future, and they may not even be automation related. They may be somebody else, related, but having that data to showcase, like, here's how many miles we've done, here's how many trips we've done that haven't been incident or have been incident free, or even if it is one, and compare that to how, the rest of the highway statistics are. And I think that helps create the story around where we can improve safety and utilizing technology.
Well, and data sharing is a very interesting topic. As we know, it is a topic of AV legislation that is currently under some discussion at the federal level. And maybe Eric, if you wanted to talk a little bit about that and your thoughts about how that works, and let's say Cruz, who's been on the streets for a while now.
Sure, I'm happy to talk about that. We see this every single day in our real world interactions in California, and we're also testing in Arizona, we're in Metro Michigan as well. But the vast majority of our operations are in San Francisco. And there is a direct line between education and acceptance. We see that regularly. We take our vehicles, we're out in the community, we are street fairs, we partner with the Exploratorium, with SF MoMA, with museums, educational institutions, and are really trying to do our part to demystify the technology. And what you see is acceptance, is growing acceptance and even excitement on the part of the public. And COVID has been a really interesting anecdotal use case here as well. For many people in the community, you think about who we're serving in partnership with the food bank and SF New Deal, these are people for whom have never had any real interaction or even cause to think about self-driving vehicles, with the exception that they may see us on the road every so often. But the fact that there's a direct human connection there and that there's a personal benefit, a social benefit that's being received through the technology, there's a direct correlation between that experience and actually enthusiasm for the development of the technology, because it impacts people on a very human level. There's an educational deficit right now, and that's true across the country. I mean, there aren't that many people who focus on this industry very specifically. I think they're all on this call right now, right? Like there just aren't that many of us who really focus the day-to-day machinations of it. And so the onus is really on us, and I'm speaking on behalf of industry, the onus is really on us to do a better job of communicating outwardly what the technology is, what it isn't, the fact that there are no commercially available AVs on the road today. When you go to a dealership, you cannot buy a self-driving vehicle. That is a remarkable misperception that the public has. And we collectively need to do a better job, because there is such a compelling case for the technology from a safety perspective, from an environmental perspective, from an accessibility perspective. And who would have thought it, but from a disaster mitigation perspective, right? Like the use cases keep growing. There's a very positive story to tell. There's a very real rationale to pursuing this. And we need to do a better job educating, communicating, because I think that's where you really do see public acceptance jump.
And so much of that comes from the public sector. And with that, I'd love to turn to Bernard so he could talk a little bit about the Jacksonville stories. You put it on the street, people are getting to see it, and yet you're doing something that you probably didn't anticipate that you would do when you first started on this whole endeavor, right, Bernard?
That is correct. That is correct. And Amy, I don't know if, because I'm sitting on behalf of Mr. Ford, I don't know if we sent you the video of our work at Mayo Clinic, and if not, at the end here, maybe I'll be able to share my screen and just share you. It's about a 40-second video.
We do have it, Bernard, so yeah, we can share it when you like, when you want to go.
Perfect. We'll just share it at the end. I mean, very quickly, the JTA, the Jacksonville Transportation Authority, for those of you who don't know, Jacksonville is the largest landmass city in the contiguous United States, and so we really serve as a regional player in terms of transportation. So we don't just service kind of Jacksonville proper, but the surrounding counties in terms of Baker, Clay, Nassau, St. John's. We really expand our tentacles really far and wide. And so the other benefit that the JTA has is we really started out as road builders and bridge builders. And so that is still in the JTA pedigree. And that is an important point because we today still build roads and bridges throughout Jacksonville. And I say all this to say that today we operate an extensive bus system. And so we move people on buses, on APMs and trains, we also operate a ferry. And so on all modes of transportation, the JTA plays. And the birth of our U2C, Ultimate Urban Circulator program, really started from our Skyway, our automated people mover, where we were one of 3, I think, cities in the United States that had kind of this particular pilot where we built this APM system throughout Jacksonville. It was never fully completed or matured. And so we really looked at how we could right now upgrade and modernize that infrastructure. And so what's unique about how we got started in the autonomous game was really about how we upgrade our Skyway, how we upgrade our automated people mover system. And so the decision with our board and with stakeholders and under the leadership of Mr. Ford was really made on let's keep the Skyway, let's expand it, and let's now upgrade it with the use of emerging technologies such as automated autonomous vehicles and various technologies. And so out of that came the birth of this project of building an entire 10-mile system that connects various neighborhoods through the downtown core called the Ultimate Urban Circulator. And so the JTA, I want to say now a year and a half ago, actually got awarded the Build Grant, formerly the Tiger Grant, but the Build Grant, one of the first Build Grants that was actually put out for autonomous vehicles to basically go ahead and start the first phase of this system, which is called the Bay Street Innovation Corridor. And so since then, and the Build Grant is now 2 days, I'm happy to report we're 2 days away now from finalizing that, and actually the Build Grant's is getting signed, and the actual first phase of the project goes into RFP and goes out on the street for a true P3 public-private partnership here in terms of starting to actually build this system, or at least the first phase of this system. But for us, part of what happened here is in preparation for this, we basically, within the automation division, we also started a program called Test and Learn. And that was our philosophy of, we realized that the technology still had a lot of maturation that needs to occur. And so we wanted to play our part in terms of pushing that forward. And so through the Test and Learn program, we started to bring in various autonomous vehicles into our program where we would actually test. So out of that, we actually were first to release what we call the Golden 20, which were the 20 critical requirements for autonomous vehicles or autonomous shuttles for public consumption or for the public sector. And we've been working really hand in hand with USDOT, the FTA, and local FDOT here in Florida in terms of on the policy piece and what this is going to mean in terms of actually bringing this to life. And so that program has expanded almost to really be its own sort of R&D as well, because we collect an enormous amount of data. We built strong relationships and partnerships with all the autonomous vehicle manufacturers, and we've now, late last year, expanded our program to go beyond shuttles, because our philosophy for our project remains vehicle agnostic. And so whether that will be a shuttle or whether that will be a retrofit vehicle, and I know some folks talk a little about policy, because there is still this big cloud that looms as to what will actually be permitted on a public road, what is actually deemed roadworthy, right? There's still a lot of legwork that needs to happen with NHTSA, and we are very much part of that discussion. But we're also working with our partners and really encouraging folks and looking at right now vehicle retrofits in terms of paratransit vehicles. We're also looking at larger vehicles such as bus retrofits and automated buses. As I mentioned to you before, we see the place for smaller vehicles. We see the place for the shuttle, particularly in urban areas where a 40-foot bus can't go. But being a regional player in a large landmass city such as Jacksonville, you can imagine that we can see the future in terms of even large buses. And so I'll fast forward to all of this work has been going on, and we continue to do this work and advance it. And then COVID-19 hit us, and as we were going through ridership decline, as we were going through the concerns within public transit, period, I remember literally sitting, in my office saying, well, we have the perfect technology to kind of address this crisis. And so very quickly, the JTA got its board in line, talked to various stakeholders and really engaged with a couple of our partners, particularly our partners Beep and Navia, which we currently had access to several shuttles, and basically reached out to Mayo Clinic and basically partnered with them as they were in real need of how to really put their people on the right task. And so for them, they really welcomed the opportunity in a real public-private partnership to leverage autonomous vehicles. And for us, we were directly, hands-on, really working with this pandemic. And what I mean by that is we were literally moving COVID-19 tests within a week of this coming on board. We basically, did a lot of the legwork in terms of mapping and getting all the right permissions, and then went straight to launching this service on Mayo Clinic's campus, where we basically moved COVID-19 tests from one end of the campus, where they actually have the drive-through tent, all the way to the hospital and the lab, where they can actually perform the testing. What is very unique that I want to say in closing about our project is we really leverage this with our partners, with NHTSA and with other people, to really push the envelope, because a lot of autonomous vehicle solution companies, autonomous vehicle manufacturers, suppliers, and even other transit authorities or other people that are running demonstrations are still doing it with a safety attendant. And when we launch our actual transit system to move people around, we also see that being the first launching platform in terms of launching it on a level 3 platform with a safety attendant, with somebody there. And that's not just for safety reasons. That's also, I think, Robert or Tim or somebody mentioned a little while ago, it might have been Eric, it is also for the educational piece. We see tremendous value in educating our customers because that education leads to acceptance. And so we see ourselves launching that on a level 3 platform and very quickly transitioning to a level 4 with a philosophy of doing a remote command and control. And this just became the perfect use case for us to push the envelope with Navia, push the envelope with Beep, push the envelope with some of these other OEMs on what that command and control needs to really be. And so what's unique for me and so exciting is the fact that we've been able to do this really on a level 4 platform. And that's because, yep, Mayo is on a very large campus, but it's private. But at the same time, pretty much in terms of the traffic flow, it's almost like a public road. And so we've removed the safety attendant. Part of what happened with COVID-19 was wanting to manage risk, limit exposure to other humans, and allow nurses and other trained folks to really be deployed addressing patient needs, not necessarily doing transportation. And so for the past almost a little over 2 months now, we've been actively engaged every day moving COVID-19 tests. We've moved over 9,000 tests throughout the course of the past 2 months, helping Mayo Clinic address their needs, as they were impacted by COVID-19. So this for us has been a phenomenal use of automation, the technology itself.
Well, and I'm going to ask you one question, then I'm going to turn it to our colleague Tim to talk a little bit about some things. But the interesting part of what you're doing is you're moving goods and not people. And a lot of questions that we've had even before this came into, as you think about the models and the use cases for transit and transportation, especially in automation, does this sort of recast some of the role of where you think public transportation could be partnering, and about your role as a mobility integrator and what you're moving to between people to goods?
Yeah, right now, I think the big message that we sent with this is, even as a public transit agency, our services are not just about moving people, right? And so what we see here is, on our ferries, we move vehicles as well as people. This just became the perfect use case for us to help this pandemic and moving COVID-19 tests. Now, in the future, I think the bread and butter of public transit is moving people, and we like I mentioned before, we're going to have to get back to that. And I believe autonomous vehicles, autonomous shuttles, automation period will have a significant role in that. And today we've even developed policy as we start to even ramp back up in terms of getting back to work. Even getting back to the normal day-to-day, within the automation division, we do weekly demonstrations. We take these vehicles out on the road, just again for the socialization piece. And we've been able to put some policies and procedures in place in terms of, we're going to mandate people wear masks. We're going to mandate certain things be done. There's less ability to do as much social distancing on a 12-passenger small vehicle than you can do on a 40-foot bus. Yeah. But at the end, when you look at it, there are other use cases where you're transporting even groups of people that don't need social distancing. So, for example, we have partnerships where we've leveraged these vehicles to move people in communities and retirement communities. And so, typically, what you have there is you have a family of 3 or 4 that want to, they're going to hail the service. They're going to get on the app and they're going to say, bring the autonomous vehicle and transport me from here to the rec center or whatever have you. And so this is going to evolve. I think we're all trying to figure out life with COVID, and hopefully someday it'll be life without COVID. But at the end, we want to remain flexible and nimble to kind of serve the public good in any way, shape, or form.
Thank you. No, I appreciate that. And, it's a good transition. And what we'll do is we'll play your video sort of at the end as we wrap the entire event. And folks may go just a little bit to like about 10 past the hour as we go. But one of the comments that came in from our audience, Tim, was about equity and sustainability being a foundation of automation policies. And an interesting part that Bernard talked about was even the form and function of existing vehicles and how they're looking at retrofitting those vehicles potentially. Maybe you could talk in your framework with the Autonomous Vehicle Alliance and the research that you've done working with OEM, sort of form and function, but also how you balance this issue of equity and sustainability, and whether it's accessibility, like you talked about before. Is I think those pieces weave together what the future of automation looks like, especially as we come out of COVID environment.
Everything is so intertwined as we start to move forward. And then before I get into answering your question, Amy, I applaud Eric and Bernard to talk about education. We have been beating this drum for about 3 years now, and no one owns the educational story around AVs. And that is a mantle and an opportunity that can be taken up by a multitude of different companies to talk about the real value propositions and use cases for AVs. And I think that needs to happen moving forward. In relationship to the accessible and barrier-free research that we've been doing, what's been absolutely fascinating is there is absolutely no vehicle on the market that is leveraging universal design, that is being built as a platform from the ground up to serve every passenger every ability out there. It simply does not exist. Most all vehicles that are servicing these markets and are thought of separately, not just as transportation and mobility or equity, mobility equity for all, are really specially built. We're hacking these together with ramps and kneeling buses and lifts and all of these other things, instead of kind of stepping back and looking at AV as an opportunity to really, really impact what accessibility for all really means. And it's not just equity in the sense of I don't have a vehicle and I need to get to work, which is extremely important for so many people in this country that are disenfranchised and are in neighborhoods that they can't get to services, let alone a job. We're talking about reinventing kind of how we think about these vehicles, and not only thinking about them from the ground up and leveraging universal design to do as such, but quite frankly, to look at the overall opportunity to build a vehicle like this, to really rethink how we position this vehicle in a way that it doesn't separate it from infrastructure, that takes infrastructure into account when we're building the vehicle. And I'll give you one example. We were speaking with a stakeholder, somebody who was working with a regional transportation authority that was also an end user. They had a visual impairment. And we had got a tremendous conversation with them about how they navigate places that they're familiar with and how they navigate places that they're unfamiliar with. And something came up during that conversation that has fascinated us, and we're digging into it even deeper, which is they talked about creating a design language for the inside of the vehicle that helps people of various abilities navigate the interior of that vehicle. In other words, in the same way that we put kind of bumpy texture at the base of a ADA sidewalk, right, to denote where the end of the sidewalk is and where the street begins, what can we do with a design language inside of the vehicle to be able to make that happen much more easily for navigation inside of the vehicle? But we broaden that perspective to think about how can the vehicle and the infrastructure accommodate that same design language and do it in a way that we can denote pickup and drop off, things like bus stops, rail stops, all of those things in a way that creates a similar design language for both. When we think about AVs, we are thinking about new opportunity. And when we do that, we have to think differently about how we design vehicles. It cannot be the same way that we've always done things. And we're trying to approach this in a very, very different way that can create a vehicle that can be part of an overall system, that can serve and create equity for all and mobility for all in one perspective, but also move people and goods and services in another time of the day. So driving a level of efficiency into a vehicle with configurability, with barrier-free, that allows the level of that efficiency of that vehicle to expand and to increase. So we're not repeating the sins of our father. We're not designing a vehicle just for one market segment. We're designing a vehicle for all.
I appreciate that, Tim. And as we wrap here at the top of the hour, and we did have our one colleague have to drop, Robert, but we have a couple last questions that I wanted to ask our audience and ask you. And Tim, thank you for framing it out, because I think it's easy for us to get dazzled by the technology. It's easy for us to get dazzled by the fact that my Domino's pizza can drive up and I can just go pull it out of the car. But we want to think about sort of the entire use case perspective, and again the policies that attach to that, and how we ensure that that builds in. So the last question, which is such a generic question, but I still want to ask it of our audience as well as our panelists. Does automation define post-COVID? Have we gotten to a moment and a tipping point in an environment in some of the demonstrations or some of just simply the way that people talk, that they see automation as really a much bigger part of our transportation landscape in the future? And I buffer that with one of the great questions that's come in from one of our audience members, and she's asked this a couple of times, which is the comment that, the recent studies that came out for PAVE showed that 50% of the public, at least or so, was still very uncomfortable and don't trust AVs. But at the same time, one could argue that shows that 50% do suggest that AVs are something they're comfortable with. And Jocelyn, thank you for that question. I really appreciate that. But what do we think? Has automation gotten to a tipping point after COVID and being able to frame these out? And maybe Bernard and Tim, I'll let you guys take, and then Eric.
Yeah,
Audience, I'd love your
I don't know that it's defined. I don't know that it's defined. I think it's a balance. I think it's a pendulum swing that always happens. I think we were fortunate to at least get to a certain place where artificial intelligence had matured enough. There was enough data to get us to a place where we see automation having played a service. You know, and my prior life, prior to coming to GTA to run this program, I was with Amazon. And so everybody's heard about what Amazon has done in terms of, you know, leveraging, you know, what they do in terms of just being able to, you know, provide goods and services for people. Similarly to what you've heard, I think Eric talked about and some of the other panelists. And so that the technology had to mature to get there. And be very clear, I think the technology was always there, but it took years and years for us to feel that we had enough data and we were in a place now. And there's still a lot of work to be done, particularly as it relates to automated vehicles, in terms of edge cases, in terms of, you know, getting the programming there. There was some conversation earlier about equity. So there's still a lot of work. There's probably a lot more work in terms of people just understanding it and understanding how actually mature and ready it is, particularly on a safety policy point of view. But I don't know that. I think it's a pendulum swing. I think we're going to see some course correction, and there'll be a little bit more of a balance. I don't know that automation is you know, we've hit a tipping point because of COVID. But I think time will tell. This COVID is potentially the next 9/11. It will change the way we conduct business and do our lives, just by virtue of the fact that people now are getting more comfortable working from home and quite a few other things. So it'll be interesting to see the dynamic and how that impacts, you know, our ability to want to to commute back and forth to work and the whole socialization piece. This is changing. This is kind of a human dynamic that I can't put my fingers on, to be honest with you.
You know, here's a couple comments that are coming in from our audience. Someone, Dave, thanks for saying this. Automation tipping point occurs when the boomers, who are transportation addicts, lose their driver's licenses. As soon as they do, they're going to demand autonomous vehicles. So that's one. And but then another, and I am going to ask you, Carol, to just raise your hand if I can have you do this, and I'm going to read your comment, and then we'll close with this and then have our audience sort of do a last comment and reaction. But the pessimist here, I don't believe it will, that we have this tipping point, unless we have champions to make sure they're incorporated into business practice. Even now, when people aren't abiding by social distancing rules when we reopen, even though they've lived by it by nuts. So there might be some memory loss that happens unless we have champions that continue to push us forward. Carol, could you raise your hand real quick? I wanted to unmute you and actually ask you to expand on that. And then if I could ask our panelists, since you all are the champions, what it takes to champion it forward. But Carol?
Hey, can you guys hear me all right?
We can.
Hi.
Yes.
So Carol DeLine, Maryland DOT. I do see a possibility of that memory loss. Something big happened, but then suddenly everyone's back at the beach and everybody's clustering together. And so people have kind of forgotten already, like they've spent months alone and suddenly they're back to being socially together. So I think that unless we have champions to actually say, hey, this is a way to help everybody and the way to help humans be better, I don't think we'll see that much incorporation. And you all, I think, are champions into making sure AV is incorporated. So that's sort of where I'm coming from. From a DOT perspective, we hope to see these integrated in our business processes, but we do see the need to partner with the private companies and everybody else. So that was just my thought there.
Thank you, Carol. So closing thoughts, Eric and Tim and Bernard on champions. Eric, we'll start with you.
I thought that was on the money. There's a very powerful use case, and Bernard spoke to this a second ago, and Tim just a few moments before that, in a way that nobody had previously imagined, but where technology, in this instance, self-driving technology, has really demonstrated in a limited use case the potential to have an enormous impact in the current crisis, and then as we move forward in the event that there are additional scenarios where social distancing, where contact-free delivery and transportation can play a role. I think that's become abundantly clear throughout the COVID crisis, which we're all still experiencing in real time. We can't talk about it as past tense yet. We're not there. It does take leadership, and it's another word for champion, of course. It does take leadership to carry this forward. And I think there is a shared responsibility on the part of the private sector as well as the public sector to develop the technology and to enable the technology to then be deployed. Robert spoke about the need for a national framework, and I couldn't agree more. This is that moment for leadership. Congress took important steps forward in the last Congress. The full House, remember, cleared the AV START Act. The Senate companion piece cleared its committee of jurisdiction, the Senate Commerce Committee. And some of that work has begun anew in this Congress. The clock is short. Attentions are scarce. But there is a very compelling case to enable the technology to develop and to have a pathway forward on that. And it is a responsibility on both the public and the private sector to get this right so that we're better prepared in the future. That does take champions and that does take leadership.
Thank you. Any other closing thoughts, Tim and Bernard?
The one thing that I'll say, the pandemic has provided us with an opportunity to really reframe the discussion around automation and AV and really put a human focus on things. That is something that has been so sorely lacking in all of the use cases and stories that we've told around AV, particularly on a national level. I think that you see greater acceptance in communities that see AVs on the road. We need to tell stories that are personal and talk about how this is going to impact people's lives in a positive way. We have the ability to do that. I'm old enough to remember back in 2000 when IBM and Cisco and Sun Microsystems and Microsoft were all selling us the promise of connectivity. And were presenting us with use cases that were far outside of the norm. I think we have the ability to do that with AV. I think we have an ability to tell a rich story that not just makes us fear the future, but wants to embrace it, that pulls consumers into that future in a way that they see as tangible to their lives.
Thank you. Bernard, you get the closing comments.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with what Eric and Tim have said. And for me, I think what I will close with, what I think will help push this over the limit. I think we talked about this and somebody mentioned how critical the education piece is. And I believe the person asking the question, Rachel, is from a public transit agency. And this is where I really myself am trying to push the envelope in terms of really public-private partnerships and trying to get larger automotive and other folks to really partner with even public transit agencies. And the reason I say that is I truly believe the key of this will be the socialization of this technology through public transit. I think when the everyday common man can interact with this technology and feel comfortable with it, that is a major step over the hump. If you think about cell phones, you think now it's become common practice, but it took time for that to scale. And today, autonomous vehicles, autonomous shuttle, it's really got to be scaled in a way where everybody can feel or have access. And until that happens, and until everybody can touch it and feel safe and feel comfortable with it, there will still be, and I think she framed it this way in saying, how quickly people forget, right? And because we just went from COVID, and she was talking about how they're just back at the beach and doing some things, and so that's what makes it difficult, because we spend a lot of time trying to always rewind and remind people what's good about this technology. And Eric talked a lot about that, from environmental to the safety piece to a lot of other things. But I think we got to figure out how to make sure this hits the masses. And for me, within in public transit, I look at it as this even though Jacksonville will be just a small step in that, but I think it's a step in that for me, which is actually probably the bigger win than actually putting the autonomous vehicle out on the street. I think that will be the tipping point.
Thank you. Listen, thank you to our panelists. Thank you to those of you who stuck with us a little bit, 10 minutes after our time. I just want to close by making a comment about ITS America and our role in this. Not only are we profiling, obviously, what's happening in the space of how technology continues to advance a safer and greener and smarter world, but it's also about how we engage each other, the experts, tackle some of the issues that come up, things like data sharing and others, but then also look at that policy side. So stick with us as we continue to explore all of those. I think that that's an important piece to this, and really what does happen at a federal level and even state level and how we work together is also what drives this as we engage the public in this future. So thank you again for your time, and again, thank you to our panelists.